The six-stage collapse of a democracy does not look like a revolution. It looks like an election result nobody can quite explain, a coalition that falls apart on a procedural vote, a parliament that keeps sitting but stops deciding. It looks from the inside exactly like politics as usual, until the moment it doesn't. Reform UK 28%, Labour 26%, the Conservatives 18%. Three numbers from Verify most recent poll date and pollster. Not a political snapshot, a structural fingerprint, and that fingerprint has appeared in the historical record before, in two countries that thought they were having a political crisis, and one that understood exactly what it was doing and did it anyway. This channel maps the stages in sequence. If you want to know where stage 4 ends and what comes after it, subscribe now. The next video won't wait for you to remember to look. Elite fracture is the fourth stage of democratic collapse, and it is the one most consistently misread. Not because it is subtle, it isn't, but because it resembles, on the surface, something democracies do all the time: disagree. The error is in the category. Normal democratic disagreement is about policy. What should taxes be? How much to spend on hospitals? Whether to go to war? Elite fracture is something categorically different. It is the moment the political class stops agreeing on the rules of the game itself. Not what to do with power. What power is, who legitimately holds it, and whether the existing institutions are the right ones to hold it at all. That distinction is not academic. Every stable democracy rests on a prior consensus that precedes the elections, the debates, the manifestos, an agreement that whatever happens, we are all playing the same game. The moment that prior consensus fractures, the game changes without anyone necessarily announcing it. Parties that once competed inside the system begin, in different ways and at different speeds, to compete about the system. And once that happens, the historical record is remarkably consistent about what comes next. Three cases. Different countries, different decades, different outcomes. The fingerprint identical. Germany, March 1930. The Grand Coalition government of Hermann Müller had been in office for less than 2 years. It represented the broadest possible base of Weimar democratic politics: Social Democrats, Centre Party, Liberals, Conservatives, the entire parliamentary mainstream gathered under one roof. It collapsed on a dispute over unemployment insurance contributions, a fraction of a percentage point. The Social Democrats wanted to raise employer contributions slightly. The Conservatives refused. The coalition dissolved. No bloc could form a majority. The Reichstag, the sovereign democratic parliament of the German Republic, effectively ceased to govern. What happened next is the detail that every account of Weimar gets slightly wrong. Nobody seized power. Nobody marched on Berlin. President Hindenburg appointed Heinrich Brüning as Chancellor, and Brüning governed by emergency presidential decree. Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, a provision that had been in the document since 1919, designed for genuine national emergencies. It was used not because of a crisis from outside, but because the parliament that was supposed to govern had fractured beyond the point of majority formation. The emergency mechanism was the solution the system offered itself: legal, constitutional, catastrophic. In the September 1930 elections, called because Brüning needed a mandate the parliament could not supply, the National Socialist German Workers' Party went from 12 seats to 107. From a fringe party to the second largest in the Reichstag, in a single election cycle. Not because the economy had collapsed yet, though it was deteriorating. Because the centre had fractured first, and the fracture created a vacuum, and vacuums in stage 4 democracies do not stay empty. The specific lesson of Weimar stage 4 is not that the Nazis were strong. In 1930, they were not. The lesson is that no party wanted the system to fail. The Social Democrats believed they were defending working people by refusing the insurance cuts. The Conservatives believed they were defending fiscal responsibility. The Centre Party believed it was holding the constitutional order together by supporting decree government rather than new elections. Every actor was behaving, by its own lights, rationally and defensibly. The fracture was not produced by villains. It was produced by a system that had lost the shared premise that makes coalition possible, and every actor within it substituting their particular interest for that lost premise. Italy, 18 months earlier in calendar terms, but a decade earlier in political logic. The Italian Parliament of 1919 to 1922 cycled through 5 governments. 5. In 3 years. The arithmetic was the problem. The Socialist Party, massively strengthened by the war's social disruption, held the industrial north. The agrarian conservative blocs held the south and the landed interior. The parliamentary centre, the Liberals, the Catholic Popular Party, the various reformist groupings, could theoretically bridge them, but the bridge required each side to accept the legitimacy of the other's core demands. The socialists would not accept property rights as given. The agrarian right would not accept labour organisation as given. The centre held neither majority nor moral authority over either flank. Into that paralysis came something the parliamentary actors consistently underestimated because it had no institutional history and no clear programme. The Fasci di Combattimento, founded March 1919, 54 original members, a meeting room in Milan. By 1921 it held 35 parliamentary seats. By October 1922, Benito Mussolini was appointed Prime Minister by King Victor Emmanuel III, not because the fascists had won a majority, they hadn't, but because the parliamentary establishment calculated that Mussolini could be managed, contained, used as ballast against the socialists, and eventually normalized into coalition politics. The calculation was wrong in every particular. The Italian case adds a second layer to the Weimar lesson. In Germany, the fracture produced a vacuum that an insurgent force filled. In Italy, the fracture produced a miscalculation by the existing establishment, a deliberate decision to invite the insurgency inside the tent, on the theory that proximity to power would domesticate it. The establishment in both cases had one thing in common. It was reasoning about the insurgent force using the assumptions of normal politics in conditions that were no longer normal. Hungary, 2010. This case runs differently, and it runs differently in a way that matters for what follows. Viktor Orban's Fidesz party won the 2010 parliamentary elections with 52.7% of the vote, just over half the electorate. Due to Hungary's electoral system, that translated into a 2/3 supermajority in parliament, a constitutional majority, achieved through democratic process, subject to international observation, formally clean. Orban used it to rewrite the constitutional order before the opposition recovered its footing. A new constitution was passed in 2011, adopted in 2012. The Constitutional Court's jurisdiction was curtailed. The electoral system was redesigned in ways that advantaged the incumbent. The judiciary was restructured. State media was consolidated. All of this was legal. All of it was done with the majority the electorate had provided. The fracture in the Hungarian case was not a fracture between Fidesz and the opposition. It was a fracture in the prior consensus about what a parliamentary majority is permitted to do. Orban's position was that a supermajority confers a mandate to remake the rules. The opposition's position was that constitutional norms exist precisely to constrain what any majority, however large, can change unilaterally. That disagreement is not a policy disagreement. It is a stage 4 disagreement, a dispute about the rules of the game itself. The Hungarian variant is the coldest of the 3 cases because it required no chaos, no street violence, no emergency decrees, no vacuum. It required only a sufficiently large majority and a leadership willing to treat constitutional norms as obstacles rather than constraints. Stage 4 does not need disorder. It can be surgical. That is what makes it, in some respects, harder to name from the inside. Now, Britain. The fracture event was 2016, not the referendum result itself. Referendum results are normal democratic processes. The fracture was what the result revealed, that the British political class did not share a prior model of what Britain is for, what sovereignty means in a post-imperial state, what the relationship between parliamentary authority and popular mandate actually is. These were not questions that the referendum created. The referendum exposed that they had never been resolved, that the peak consensus of the post-war settlement had papered over them for 70 years with growth, with European integration, with the managed decline of empire, and that when the paper was removed, there was nothing structural underneath. The Labour Party that emerged from 2016 is not the same organisation it was in 2015, and not because of a single leadership change. It is internally divided between a traditional working-class base concentrated in post-industrial towns, which voted Leave, which is losing confidence in institutions, which is the demographic that reform is now reaching, and a progressive urban professional coalition that defines itself partly against that base's cultural instincts. Those two wings of the same party do not share a prior model of what Britain is for either. They are currently held together by the arithmetic of first past the post and the memory of being out of government for 14 years. That is not consensus. That is cohabitation. The Conservative Party is not in decline. It is in an existential question about whether it has a reason to exist in its current form. The 2024 result was not a bad election, it was a structural verdict. The coalition of voters that sustained Thatcherism, then Cameron-era modernisation, then the Johnson realignment, does not cohere anymore. The fiscal conservatives, the social traditionalists, the business pragmatists, and the English nationalist wing are four different parties sharing a name and a head office. Reform UK holds verify current polling figure in recent surveys, making it, by some measures, the largest party by vote intention. It has no established institutional infrastructure, no record of governing, no tested internal discipline, no clear doctrine beyond opposition to the existing settlement. In the Italian case, that description applied precisely to the Fasci di Combattimento in 1920. In the Weimar case, it applied to the NSDAP in 1928. This is not a prediction. It is a category identification. No bloc in British politics currently commands a majority, moral or parliamentary. The government governs because it won the seats the electoral system allocated, not because it commands the assent of the country. The opposition cannot articulate a coherent governing coalition because its internal fracture is as profound as the government's. Parliament sits, Parliament debates. Parliament produces very little that any large segment of the electorate has asked for or believes in. That is not a bad patch. That is the mechanism of Stage 4. Every Stage 4 in this analysis produced one figure who eventually monopolized the fracture. Someone who didn't simply exploit the breakdown, but gave it a direction, a name, a shape that the fracture itself had not yet acquired. Weimar had more than one candidate before it settled on the answer the history books record. Italy had its answer before most of the parliamentary establishment registered the question was being asked. Hungary's answer came from inside the existing party system, not outside it. I have a view on whether Britain's equivalent has already appeared or is still forming. If your reading of the current landscape puts that figure somewhere specific, inside one of the existing parties, outside all of them, or not yet visible, the place to make that argument is below. This is genuinely the stage in the pattern where individual political judgment still matters because the outcome is not yet fixed. That changes. The Britain of 2024 to 2026 is not Weimar. It is not Italy in 1921. It is not Hungary in 2010. The specific texture of every Stage 4 is different. The country, the economy, the international context, the particular shape of the insurgent force, the particular weakness of the center. The pattern does not reproduce itself in costume. What reproduces is the structure, a prior consensus that has dissolved, a political class substituting factional interest for the shared premise that made governance possible, a vacuum forming in the space between a discredited mainstream and a not yet institutionalized alternative, and a series of actors, in government, in opposition, in the insurgency, each reasoning about the situation using assumptions the situation has already made obsolete. Parliament is sitting. Debate is continuing. Elections will be held. All of that is true, and in every prior case, all of that was also true, right up to the point when it wasn't. The three numbers at the start of this video, Reform at 28, Labour at 26, Conservatives at 18, are being read, by most of the people reading them, as a political snapshot, a moment in the cycle, something that will shift as the next news story breaks, as the economy moves, as a party finds a new leader. That is a reasonable reading. It is the reading that the parliamentary correspondents in Berlin were making in 1930. It is the reading that the editors of the Corriere della Sera were making in 1921. They were not unintelligent. They were not uninformed. They were reasoning about data that had changed category, using a framework the data had already outgrown. The question is not whether Britain is in stage 4. The evidence for that is in the structure of the parliament, the internal composition of the parties, the polling trajectory, and the fracture that 2016 made visible and nothing since has repaired. The question, the only question left at this point in the analysis, is which of the three historical variants Britain is running: the vacuum model, the miscalculation model, or the surgical model. Each produces a different stage 5. Each requires a different thing to stop it. And each, from the inside of stage 4, looks very much like the others.